Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. This is the Rotary Club of Toronto. I'm John Fortney, the club president, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to our meeting and for our members to our special meeting following our regular meeting. Before I get started with our regular agenda, I first will ask for your indulgence as I have a statement to make now and another one at the end of the meeting on two different topics. I will ask for your indulgence because I may have trouble getting through them. So please bear with me, but they're very important, okay? Since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we have been faced with realities that our Indigenous brothers and sisters have known for generations. One of the most egregious aspects of humiliation and abuse inflicted on our original peoples was the residential school system. Many of us naively thought it was something of the past, when in reality, it continued well into the lifetime of most of us in this meeting. The Rotary Club of Toronto has been deeply committed to Indigenous issues for well over a decade, and we know that there was much more to the story than what was presented. The community itself knew it was their children that went missing. The discovery of 215 bodies of children at one residential school was not a surprise, but rather a confirmation of what those beautiful young souls' families already knew. This is only one school. There are many more. The thought is gut-wrenching and abhorrent. The Rotary Club of Toronto is a committed partner with our Indigenous brothers and sisters in the fight for justice and the pursuit of truth and reconciliation. Let us take a moment of silence to honor the lives of these innocents and the anguish it has caused their families and their communities, and the shame it has brought to our country. When they buried the children, what they didn't know, they were lovingly embraced by the land. Held and cradled in a mother's heart, the trees wept for them. With the wind, they sang mourning songs their mothers didn't know to sing. Bending branches to touch the earth around them, the Creator cried for them, tears falling like rain. Mother Earth held them until they could be found. Now our voices sing the mourning songs. With the trees, the wind, light sword fire ensure that they are never forgotten as we sing justice. This was by Abigail Echo Hawk. I've missed a page, I'm so sorry. I've lost the words. At this time, I would like to acknowledge, after the invocation and the recognition of the traditional lands, please stay tuned for the playing of the national anthem and the loyal toast. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples who have walked and cared for this land for 15,000 years. They include the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the treaty peoples of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In this cruel and sometimes unmerciful world, where prejudice is much too commonplace and beliefs are all too often the source of hatred instead of love, we know that worldwide harmony and accord is still an elusive dream. On this day of Rotary Fellowship, we ask Rotarians to inspire the antagonists in places torn by intolerance or violence, so that they may learn to be compassionate, understanding, and peaceful. Thank you. Now for our national anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, the Queen. Please be seated. Thank you, Glenn and Brigitte. Returns a guest, it is now my pleasure to introduce our head table. I'm pleased to have the following people with me today. Harry Figoff, a Rotarian since 1989. Classification, financial services. Harry is the president of HGF Financial Inc., and he's chair of our audit committee. Robert O'Brien, a Rotarian since 1985, classification, law practice general. Robert is a partner and lawyer with Coutts Crane, past club president, and our Let's Be Personal speaker for today. Michelle Guy, a Rotarian since 1991, classification, law practice general. She is a lawyer and partner with Coutts Crane, also a club past president, and host to our guest speaker, who is Dr. Eileen de Villa, who will be more formally introduced shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, our head table. For our virtual meetings, we don't have an official monitor to introduce visiting Rotarians and guests, so I will proceed. And I do note that there are some visiting Rotarians. I see Linda Ryder, David Andrews. I know there's probably others, and there'll be many on YouTube. So please, I welcome you very much. To our visiting Rotarians, thank you for choosing our club for your makeup. We hope that you enjoy the meeting. To all of our guests, welcome to our virtual meeting. Please feel free to contact the office and find out how you may be able to join us and make a difference. Rotarians, please welcome our visitors in the tradition of our great club. Announcements. Number one, you may already know this because I say it every week, but in case you do not, you should be aware that at these virtual Rotary meetings, that if you have your video camera on, you may show up on YouTube, on Google Meet, recordings, or on live streaming. We ask that when your camera is on, you present a professional image. Have your lunch earlier, please, and be aware of what's going on in the background when your camera is on. If you do not want to appear, please turn off your video. We will not be able to edit you out later. On a second note, we've noticed that people are being accidentally removed from meetings. If you click on a person's picture during Google Meet, you may accidentally remove them from the meeting if you're not careful. Please refrain from doing this. Thank you. Members, if you are currently on Google Meet, please stay on for the special members only meeting at the end of this regular meeting. If you're on YouTube, please join us on Google Meet at that time. Now, it is time for our next personal speaker. So over to you, Robert.
Well, thank you very much, President John. And I've been avoiding this for some period of time. So thank you, Don Bell, for asking me and for being so persistent. All of us have our own personal Rotary story to tell. Mine starts on the first day of my working career, 40 years ago this August. It was my first day of my articles, and on that very first day, the senior partner and past president Elgin Coots took me to lunch. And he told me in a great detail the story of Paul Harris and Rotary. That introduction sealed my fate. Within the year, I was a member of Rotaract, where I served for 4 years. 4 years later, I had the honor, and truly it was an honor, to be invited to join our club. Peter Stevenson and I were then the youngest members of our club, the only ones in our 20s. And the club had a membership of 400. And the number at Rotary lunches on Friday was never below 200. 10 years later, I was asked to be president. I was then the youngest president of our club. And I was honestly afraid that the club had taken leave of its senses when Bob Smith called me with the invitation. I have too many memories of Rotary over the past 40 years. So let me share a few select photos. And the first, which is on the screen, I had the privilege of announcing the club's $500,000 contribution to the Rotary Club of Toronto Transition Center at St. Mike's. When I arrived for the presentation, I was asked to speak. No problem. The problem was I was asked to put on a massive pair of angel wings as part of their Urban Angel campaign chaired by John Tory. My first reaction was, no way, I was not going to wear them. And the Star reporter on site said, look, it works this way. If you want your club covered on this important story, you're going to put on those damned angel wings. And so I did. And the club got the media coverage in the Toronto Star front page. And so did I, much to my embarrassment. But I would say it wasn't every day that a lawyer gets to be called an angel. Next slide. The next time our club was in the media was in the 1999 provincial election. We hosted Premier Mike Harris, Dalton McGuinty, and Howard Hampton, all in short order. At the Harris meeting, which was attended by over 300 people in the concert hall, the Premier spoke. I rose to politely thank him, and bang, immediately I was interrupted by protesters who had found their way into the room and were screaming abuse and name-calling. They were, of course, silent during the Premier's speech, and they only let loose when I got up. The question in my mind at the time was, why now and why me? It got my Irish up, and I spoke over them, and the amazing club members rallied, and we won. And they left, and we continued with our meeting. Next. That year, we donated 6 vans to homeless victims in the city to provide relief, and we worked with Mayor Mel Lastman and then Councillor Jack Layton. This is a picture in front of City Hall. After my year as Rotary president, I went on to head the Churchill Society for 3 years. But Rotary has a way of bringing you back home. For me, 2 of the many highlights were, next slide, the centennial year. I was asked to chair a wonderful, wonderful committee to host RI President Sakaji Tanaka in President Neil's year in March 2013. We had President Tanaka all to ourselves from Thursday night to Saturday, and we planned an array of special events throughout. It was exciting, and he was a genuine rock star. Next. I went to the last pre-COVID RI convention in Hamburg, Germany, and I was so proud to be there with my partners, incoming President Kevin Power and Michelle Guy. Next slide. There are too many other memories, which I'll never forget. But the RI motto in my year was follow your Rotary dream. And that summed it up for me. I followed my Rotary dream, and I encourage each of you to follow your Rotary dream. Thank you for allowing me to share in some of these personal reflections. And back to you, President John.
Thank you so much, Robert. You were my first president, even though it was only for your last month, June of 1999, but you were my first. And I think you're the first person to use pictures in your Let's Be Personal. What a great touch. I love it. And those stories, we have to keep reminding us, especially newer members, what we've done. And it's people like you as president that have made things happen. Thank you. If members want to get on the list, a Let's Be Personal speaker, please contact Don Bell. It is now time for our guest speaker introduction, and I would like to pass things over to past President Michelle Guy. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, President John. Dr. de Villa took the top position at Toronto Public Health 4 years ago. Her job is to persuade us that our lives are worth saving. She does this by looking at the facts, the data, and the science. Dr. de Villa is a doctor, and her patients are the 3 million of us that live in this city. One of the people that Dr. de Villa looked up to during her residency was her predecessor, even though she didn't know it at the time, was Dr. Sheila Bazara, who became a valued member of this club when she contributed so much to this Rotary Club of Toronto. Due to Dr. de Villa's calm and unrelenting efforts, we are winning the COVID battle. We are so proud today to have Dr. de Villa speak to us. I give you Dr. de Villa.
Thank you very, very much, Michelle, for the kind introduction. And good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am truly, truly delighted to be here, to be able to speak with you and to answer some questions, hopefully, about COVID-19 and our shared future. There is a slide deck in front of you. I assure you, not as interesting as the slideshow you just saw, but I will do my best with the material that I have. And I will take you very quickly through this slide deck because actually I think the conversation is always more interesting than are the slides. That's generally, with the exception of those slides that we just saw, which were fabulous pictures, by the way. I have not seen previous Let's Be Personal talks, but that certainly has set the bar in my mind for what it's worth. Anyway, let's go through the slide deck, and then let's get into the conversation. I did want to provide you with a bit of a status update in respect of the COVID-19 epidemic as it has happened here in Toronto. If we go to the next slide, I won't belabor the point on these little graphs. You will see that this is what we call our monitoring dashboard as of June 2nd, so just a few days ago. The good news is that the bad indicators are showing a downward slope, so moving in the right direction, and the indicators of what should be happening in respect of vaccination are going up. You will see that overall cases are going down, our weekly incidence is going down, hospitalizations are going down, we're seeing less transmission from one person to the next, and thankfully, a slowly but surely rising proportion of our population with at least one dose of vaccine on board, and hopefully, as their turn comes up for eligibility, that second dose will also be there as well. Going to the next slide. While we do have some positive indicators as shown on that slide, though, there are some reasons for us to continue to be very cautious, to continue to have some element of concern. And that's because we are seeing the emergence of what you've likely heard through the media are variants of concern. They've contributed to surges in cases elsewhere, most notably in India. We do have these variants here in our midst. And we do know, based on early evidence, that there is increased transmissibility associated with this particular variant, this V1617, recently called the Delta variant by our colleagues at the WHO, the World Health Organization. So we are monitoring very, very carefully. Turning to the next slide, though, let's look at our vaccination progress in the city. Next slide. Our Team Toronto effort, is focused on getting as many residents vaccinated as quickly as possible, and it is truly a team effort. Vaccinating a population of 3 million people requires a number of partners to collaborate and coordinate efforts with each other. Healthcare partners, hospitals, Ontario health teams, practitioners of every imaginable stripe, pharmacies and Toronto Public Health, we are all working together to administer whatever COVID-19 vaccines are made available to us, courtesy of our federal and provincial counterparts. And as you can see from this slide, we're pleased to say that as of yesterday afternoon, a little over 2 million doses have been administered in Toronto thus far, and we're not done yet. So we are still working hard with our partners to get the job done. Next slide. Those efforts really do have to be through a variety of different channels. And I'll just very briefly touch on this to say that we have a number of different strategies, approaches, and task forces in order that we get vaccine out to those for whom getting access to vaccine might otherwise be challenging. We know that we have to make extra special efforts for certain subpopulations within our city to ensure that they are provided the protection of vaccines and that therefore we are all afforded the optimal protection together as a city. Turning to the next slide, just to give you a little sense as to what our overall vaccine coverage is, what it looks like at this point in time. So as of yesterday, the 3rd of June, we know that just under 71% of adults in Toronto aged 18 and over have initiated vaccination and have at least one dose on board. And we now have about 8% of our population and growing that have had 2 doses as well. You will see that there are varying levels of coverage by different age groups. I would call your attention to the fact that there are areas you can see in the 30 to 54 age group where I'd like to see that number getting a little bit higher, well, actually a lot higher. But I'm also particularly concerned with and watching that 80 plus group where you can see that we're at about 73.6% with at least one dose of vaccine on board. That tells you that there's still a significant proportion of those 80 years of age and older who have not initiated vaccine. So my plea to the entire city is to please, if you know somebody who is 80 years of age and older, make sure you have that conversation with them about whether they've been vaccinated or not. And if there's something you can do to help get them to a vaccination site and to get that important protective benefit that's conferred by vaccine, I would strongly encourage you to do so. But don't save that only for the 80-year-olds and older in our lives. Let's make sure that we're connecting with our entire network of family, friends, and neighbors, and ensure that they're aware of the benefits of vaccine and how important it is that they get that opportunity. On to the next slide. The province has initiated and has promoted the reopening framework. I won't linger on this for too long. The next slide explains what that roadmap to reopening looks like on the part of the province. We certainly are hopeful, I think all of us, to restore the many activities that actually make life that much better. Interacting with each other in many different settings. And of course, this will depend on what we're able to do together in terms of reducing ongoing transmission and getting people vaccinated as quickly as possible. So now, the really good part. Next slide, looking ahead. And this is where, I hopefully will take a few minutes of your time to describe, what I think is important and where I think together we can move forward and really start to build the city that we all so badly want to live in. We want to make our city the most livable city and the most livable community possible. So you've heard from Michelle, thanks to her lovely introduction, that sometimes I refer to my job as being Toronto's doctor. So it's in this capacity that I express my hope that each of you is the recipient of at least one vaccination, and that you will accept your second as quickly as possible at the appropriate time. As I've tried to indicate through the slides, we're certainly doing everything we can to get you vaccines as quickly as possible. And in that respect, I think we've had some success. If you've seen on the slides, just over 70% of people 18 and older in Toronto have had at least one dose of vaccine. And I would say this, if this pandemic had to happen at all, better that it should happen now when our knowledge is greatest and our technology is able to speed the application of that knowledge. Even 5 years earlier, I'm not sure that we would have had these safe and powerful vaccines to help us get out of this. So again, I will remind you, if you haven't had your vaccination yet, please do. And if you know somebody who hasn't, please encourage them and help them get there. The other thing I would encourage you to do is to keep taking steps to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. Every new infection is an opportunity for this virus to mutate. And we still have, as I've shown you through the slides, a considerable number of people to vaccinate. So there are still many vulnerable people amongst us. So steps to prevent transmission are still necessary. We are navigating unknown territory, particularly as we increase our understanding of the emerging COVID-19 variants. And I don't say this to discourage you, and I don't say this to create worry. It's just to remind you that what you see on the horizon is a much safer and healthier future, but it's still in the distance, and we have to keep being careful until we reach that point. People like me presenting remarks like these to audiences like you, I fear are prone to drawing on many of the same analogies, and some might even call them cliches. So you'll have to forgive me for that. But other than the horizon, probably the favorite amongst those these days is probably, at last, the finish line is in sight. You might have heard that once or twice before in the last little while. And the thing is, I think that's true. But when it is finally over, my view is that the race we've run will not bring us back to exactly where we started. I believe that we don't know yet how the pandemic has changed us, how it's changed society, how it's changed the world around us. In public health, in a pandemic, the decisions are seldom easy and the choices are seldom simple. What's possible in theory is often complicated, it's often costly and painful, in fact, in real life. And yet the alternative was always to let people get sick, to overwhelm the hospitals, and to see people possibly die on a scale that we had not ever seen before. I challenge everyone here today to recall how you felt when you read that India, in the devastating COVID crisis of the last few months, was running out of oxygen for people. India has lost 3.3 million people. That's basically the population of our whole city. In fact, it's a little more, isn't it? There was never, at any point in the pandemic, anything to protect us from becoming our version of India or any of the worst case situations that emerged around the world, except for the decisions we took, the resolve of people taking up the challenge, and now the vaccines that we can take to protect us. I truly hope the decisions we've made during the pandemic would pass Rotary's four-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? In my job, necessity has often linked me with limits, restrictions, lockdowns, shutdowns, and warnings. And to be honest, I'm not sure how much goodwill some of my decisions earned me. But please know that I strove always and will continue to strive to tell the truth about the necessary course of action, to propose actions that are as fair as possible and that would protect as many people as possible. You know, most public health practitioners believe that a healthy economy can't exist without a healthy public. Sick people can't come to work. Sick people can't earn and therefore can't spend. Sick people make other people sick. Frightened people don't come to shop or dine or do anything they don't have to do. And while the population is never just one extreme or another, we have seen in polls throughout the pandemic that there was broad public support for the restrictions that were put in place to protect us, and often considerable support for even more restrictions. Public health officials typically don't want lockdowns. They may solve some problems, but in fact, in so doing, they create others. If you're stuck at home, unable to get out, that's hard enough. And it can get worse. What about the person who's lost a job, who lacks the savings to tide them over? None of that is healthy. So public health loves a thriving economy because that means people are working and they're able to achieve more of what we call the social determinants of health. They have employment, they have income, they have food, they have housing stability. The city, the province, and the country and the world around them are stronger and stable. They have hope. They have purpose. That makes them mentally healthy. Public health loves a healthy economy because it is part of good health. There will be, I believe, I suppose what can be called a hangover from COVID-19, which has dominated our thoughts, governed our actions, and changed our lives for so long now. Paradoxically, in some ways, it's almost hard to imagine life without it now. What then does the post-COVID future look like? Well, first, I'm sorry to say that I'm not sure there will ever really be a truly post-COVID period. It's probably more realistic, I'm sorry to say that, on a Friday afternoon, no less. Probably more realistic, though, to think in terms of the post-pandemic. Right now, we're in a phase of extreme vigilance because of the variants. Viruses are always mutating and creating variants because it's how they stay alive. And it's why the flu, for example, varies from year to year. For the most part, the vaccines as developed are able to fight for us. And there's confidence that the current vaccines can be adjusted to counter the variants. COVID will probably become endemic, which means it will probably always be here. But the general belief is it will likely become a typically mild and usually manageable illness, inconvenient but harmless in most people, so long as it's treated carefully, particularly in vulnerable communities like those who are older amongst us. Remember, the flu kills as many as 8,000 Canadians every single year. I do think we'll see change for the better in terms of our ability to move around and interact with each other, and a return to lots of things that are familiar to us during the rest of this year. I wish I could put a more specific time frame to it, but I'm afraid I can't at this point. As ever, variants and vaccination rates will drive what can happen safely and when, accompanied by our appetite for risk. I think work and workplaces will face change and need flexibility. You know, a Bloomberg story in the last day or so had the headline, "Employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home." As a public health practitioner, I think workplaces must consider the norms around sickness in the workplace. If COVID has taught us one thing, it's that sick people make other people sick. There needs to be a rethink of a culture that condones or encourages coming to work sick, either implicitly or explicitly. As a physician, I expect there will be a lot of anxiety, anger, and other kinds of stress-related emotions at work, at home, at school, pretty much everywhere we interact. We will be unlearning a number of fear-linked or at least maybe defensive behaviors. Masks may stay with us for a long time, even if just because some feel safer wearing them. We're going to have to get to know each other again. And I think we're going to have to get used to each other again. In all, the new normal probably won't be identical to the old normal. You know, it's interesting that in the United Kingdom, where the pubs reopened with great fanfare, as I'm sure you can imagine, landlords were finding shortly thereafter that people didn't keep returning in their former numbers. There's a lot to unlearn, and I think a lot that we have yet to come to terms with. The final thing I think that will define the post-pandemic future is the answer to this question. What do we want to make of that future? We had a lot of time to reflect during the pandemic. Our fear for our own health, our fear for those we love, our time confined to home and masked and keeping 6 feet apart. From all of these things, I believe, will come a reevaluation of what is truly important in life and of what we want, what we expect. In my view, we cannot have suffered and lost and come through without pulling something good from this, something more than having just survived. There's no one right answer. But I suggest that Rotary's 4-way test truly can be the measure of what comes next. So I will end as I began, observing that whenever the pandemic is over, I don't believe we will end up exactly where we started. I do believe good things lie ahead, and that we are all somewhat energized after a little rest, I think. But I do believe that we will be energized and attuned to the opportunity to do better and differently, and to reflect in our choices the wisdom that comes from this particular experience. And for me, that is what the future, the post-pandemic Toronto, the post-pandemic world looks like. A place of great uncertainty that is still a world of opportunity. And above all, a second chance, right? A second chance, if you will, to consider and achieve what we want for ourselves, for those we love, for Toronto, for Canada, and for the world. So with that, I thank you very, very much for inviting me here today. I do sincerely hope that in the not too distant future, we can all actually be gathered in the same room together. You know, for Rotary, for public health, I do think that there is much that we have to do in the new world, and that new world is drawing ever closer. So I would love to tell you, I'd love to have more opportunities to tell you more about our work at Toronto Public Health. And I would certainly love, especially after that slideshow, I would love to hear more about yours. So with that, I'll now turn it back to, I think, Michelle, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. de Villa. It's President John. While we're waiting, I know there's one question. We'll see if some more questions come up. I just want to say, you know, the last year and a bit, between politicians and the officers of health, regardless of political stripes, have been there literally every day, and you're tireless. I know we all know you're doing your best, and there are some people who have politicized this, and I'm sorry that people like you who work so hard have to deal with that. But thank you so much. I mean, every day you're on the TV, we see you, and you give us comfort and strength and knowledge. So thank you so much for that. Let me see questions. I do have one. You previously expressed your concerns. Oh, there it just appeared. There we go. Oh, well, there was a question about the variants and you know, as we are coming out of all this, you previously expressed your concerns about the variants of concern and reopening. How concerned are you about the Delta variant and the timing of reopening Toronto?
You know, that's an excellent question, and one that is being very actively looked at this point in time. There's no question, we should be concerned. We have seen what has happened. You know, that was what gave rise to wave 3 was the emergence of the B117 variant, you know, towards March, you know, we knew it was coming in late February. It really started to take off more in March and April. So certainly we should be very, very mindful of that. But as much of the experience throughout the pandemic has been, we are still actively learning, and we are in a different scenario right now. We have 71% of our population with at least one dose of vaccine on board, and a growing proportion of our population is getting to that state. And as well, we know that we've got about 8% of our population with 2 doses of vaccine. So to my mind, I do think it's important that we keep that hope to stay open. And that's why I'm continuing to encourage people. The best thing we can do together is to help those in our community that are not yet vaccinated to get vaccinated, to help those around us who need to get a second dose and may need some assistance, I should say, in so doing, to provide that assistance. And finally, to continue to practice what we know are good measures, keeping distance as much as possible, you know, maintaining mask use where we can't keep distance for now, taking advantage of the lovely weather. It is all too brief, but it is much safer, absolutely much safer in terms of COVID-19 transmission to be outdoors. And if we can drive transmission down through a combination of what I would call good public health self-protection behaviors and vaccination, I think we will find ourselves in good stead. But we are constantly watching, constantly monitoring, and really being very mindful and learning as well from the experiences of those in India and as well in the United Kingdom.
Oh, I can say I'm double vaxxed. So I tell you, the sense of security and just comfort it gives you, it's amazing. There was an interesting question because of all the protocols and us cocooning for the last year, the incidences of flu must be much affected or reduced.
Yeah, so absolutely. There was throughout all of Canada virtually no influenza, right? Nothing to speak of. And that was the experience that was found in the Southern Hemisphere when they were, last summer, fall, when they were in their winter season. We'll see what happens as they now move, we move into summer, they go into their winter season. You're absolutely right. Many of the measures that were adopted to prevent the spread of COVID-19 were highly, highly effective in terms of reducing the spread of influenza. So we've certainly picked up some lessons and I think some good practices to inform flu prevention for the future over and above vaccination, which is another recommended approach, obviously, for flu prevention.
I think we're going to find, I know, unfortunately, being a family that has been affected by cancer a fair bit, the hand sanitizer at the front door has sort of been a staple between my parents and our house whenever. I think that's going to become a common, keeping it in your car, at the front door, and just when you leave. I think we're going to be, that kind of practice, I think will become a going forward thing, not just a pandemic thing.
Absolutely. Although I would say this, President John, if there is an opportunity to wash hands with soap and water, that's probably that would be the preferred method. The hand sanitizer is nice to have when a sink and hand washing facilities aren't accessible or convenient. But I would just encourage people to remember that hand washing is still, what I would recommend. Not to take away from sanitizer, but it's just a more convenient method for keeping hands clean.
You know what? That's a good message, because people, I think, it's easier just to open the tube and very good. There's another good message of the day. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So I'm just so thrilled we're all so thrilled that you were able to make time in your crazy schedule for us. So we very much appreciate it. A donation has been made in your honor to the city's United Way Greater Toronto campaign. United Way Greater Toronto works in communities in Peel, Toronto, and York region. At United Way, their mission is to meet urgent human needs and improve social conditions by mobilizing the community's volunteer and financial resources in a common sense of caring. Thank you. Friday, June the 11th, our guest speaker will be Bill Riedelmeyer, and his topic will be sustainability, community, organics, biodynamics, and regenerative agriculture need to sustain the community as well as the earth. Please feel free to invite guests and share the links to connect. However, have them contact the office first in order to be admitted. Now, my second comment of the day. The diversification and inclusion team has asked that we acknowledge that this is the first week of Pride Month. And in Canada, we have a lot to be thankful for. Traditionally, it's a month with vigils and meetings, parties, parades. That won't be happening this year. The Toronto Parade is known as being the largest in North America. And in Canada has been stellar in gay rights and one of the first to allow gay marriage. But we have more to do. And I think during this time, we should maybe think about those that struggled to make this all happen for us to be where we are today. And I can tell you that growing up gay in the 70s and the 80s was not easy. It was very, very hard. It's very difficult for me to talk about this. As most of you who know me, I don't usually talk about this. But those of you that have young people in your lives, if they are questioning their sexual identity, please offer love, support, no judgment. The best thing you can do is to know who you actually, to be who you really are. And if you love yourself and accept yourself, that's the healthiest way to be. Then you can go on and love and accept everyone else. So that is my thought for the day. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Pride Month. This is the end of our regular meeting. Thank you for our guests for coming. We will be stopping the YouTube presentation now and asking any guests on Google Meet to please leave the meeting. Rotary members, if you are on YouTube, please join us on the Google Meet for our special meeting to approve a club bylaw and to appoint the auditors. Thank you.